System activate.
Welcome to the Countertops 101 podcast. Innovative ideas and strategies from today's industry leaders to help make your business more successful. And now, here's your host, Sam Graham.
Hello, everyone. On today's episode, we want to take some time and discuss silicosis. I know if you guys are a countertop fabricator, you're probably pretty aware of silicosis and the impact it's having on the industry, but I'm not sure everybody has all the details. And I know we're getting lots of calls and visiting lots of fabricators, and they're all wondering, okay, silicosis is a big deal. What steps should we take to make sure that we are in a good position not to have any issues? So that's kind of what we want to cover today. So starting off, I kind of want to cover what is silicosis. I think we all hear silicosis. We assume it's something with the lungs. So I just kind of want to read you what the American Lung Association says. And they define silicosis as a type of pulmonary fibrosis, a lung disease caused by breathing in tiny bits of silica, a common mineral in sand, quartz, and many other types of rock. Over time, exposure to silica particles causes scarring in the lungs, which can harm your ability to breathe. So basically, silica is the fine dust that's in a lot of natural stones. Quartz is kind of at the forefront because it has the highest concentration of silica. And when you breathe it in, eventually that gets into your lungs and it scars up your pulmonary tissues and it damages them, right? So over time, as you breathe that in, it can damage your lungs and then you can have difficulty breathing. All that scar tissue gets in there and then it's not exchanging the oxygen out of the air and putting it into your blood like it needs to be. I mean, you kind of suffocate in a way. So the main thing I think the takeaway there is in the news right now, they're really sensationalized silica and the silicosis. It's exposure over time. So a lot of times it could take up to 20 years of exposure breathing in that consistently to develop silicosis. It's not something that you're just going to get immediately overnight because you breathed in dust one time. It is truly caused by exposure to silica for a long duration of time. So if you think about it, each year there's roughly I'd say somewhere around 2.3 million workers in the United States that are exposed to silica. Of that 2.3 million, roughly 2 million of them are in the construction industry. So if you're working with concrete or granite or basically any sort of stone material, even if you're like in the landscape industry, cutting pavers and things of that nature, you're exposing yourself to silica. So it's not just the countertop industry that is got to be sensitive to silica. There's a lot of within the construction field, a lot of segments that expose their workers to silica. The quartz and the countertop section just tends to be in the most heat right now just because of everything that's in the news and the amount of exposure and deaths that have hit the scene. So I think there's been in the state of California, the Department of Health has come across roughly 95 cases of silicosis that were actually workers that worked at countertop shops. And of that 95, I think 10 of them have passed away. So there have been deaths. If you really think about the overall scheme of things, like quartz has been in the marketplace now for over 20 years. Obviously people have been cutting natural stones for a long time, and 95 people in California. I mean, there are probably, I wouldn't know how many in California, but I assume there's probably over 10,000 people, 20,000 people working in the natural stone industry that are actually cutting and fabricating. California is a massive state. So 95% is a very, very small portion of that demographic, but it is on the radar now, and California is doing what they can to mitigate any of that risk. So if you're not aware of what's going on, that's kind of a background in what silicosis is and why is this such a hot topic right now? Well, the reality is in Australia, they kind of came across the same thing. Their Department of Health found that people were getting silicosis. And so they really cracked down on trying to regulate silicosis in the countertop market. And again, quartz has a very, very high concentration of silica. It can be upwards of 90% in quartz countertops, whereas natural stone might have up to like 45, 50%, and porcelain might have, let's say, like 20%. So when you compare all the materials, apples to apples, quartz countertops right now have a very high concentration of silica. So it's what's coming under the gun. Now in Australia, they tried to regulate it just like OSHA is in California, and we'll get into that. But they couldn't find a way to regulate it, right? I mean, they were finding people, they were going around trying to put these best practices in place. Nobody was really adapting, and they felt like they couldn't get their hands around it. So they just made a blanket statement that as of July 1st, 2024, there's no more quartz countertops in the continent of Australia. So they pretty much went from, hey, we're going to try to regulate it, struggled with that for a couple of years, couldn't figure out a way to get their arms around it. People weren't complying, didn't seem to make a difference. So they just moved to, we're going to ban everything outright and just be done with it. So that's kind of what we don't want to happen here in America. So California OSHA, so Cal-OSHA, which is basically the safety department in California. Everybody knows the federal department, OSHA, that comes and monitors safety and making sure your employers have a safe work environment. Cal-OSHA is the same basically as OSHA, except regular OSHA that most people know is on the federal level. Cal-OSHA is a state-run program that does basically the same thing. They have pretty much the same laws. Different states, safety departments might have specific differences and minor changes between what the federal OSHA says, but they're all out there to do the exact same thing, which is create a safe work environment for the employee. So Cal-OSHA has kind of seen what's happened in Australia. They've kind of taken note because, like I mentioned, the California Health Department's found 95 cases of silicosis since 2019. So they saw what happens in Australia. Now they're seeing it happen here in California. So in December of 2023, they put in the new ETS, the Cal-OSHA ETS for silica on December 14th, 2023. And that's basically their emergency temporary standards. And what that does is it's not exactly a standard that is just been adopted and is regular. These are emergency temporary standards that kind of supersede the existing standards while they try and get their hands around this. So main thing you need to know is if you are a fabricator in California, it is not a matter of if you get inspected by OSHA, it is just going to be a matter of when. California is really cracking down on this. So you need to be, listening to this, putting these best practices into place to make sure that you are providing the safest work environment you can for your employees, and that should OSHA come to your shop, you've got all your T's crossed and your I's dotted and you are good to go. Now, if you are a fabricator outside of California, you're not going to be in imminent danger of OSHA coming and closing down your shop or giving you fines, right? It's only the state of California that has really gone just crazy on making sure this is all dialed in. All the other states haven't really taken that approach yet. Now, they are watching. They're wanting to see what's going to happen in California. They're watching to see if California can make a difference. And I can guarantee you, if California starts to struggle and they can't get a grasp on it, the other states are going to follow the lead. If California says, hey, the same thing Australia did, we can't get a grip on this and we're just going to ban it, the floodgates are come, right? California OSHA has made decisions on lots of things from water conservation and water quality, LED lights, the incandescent light bulb, a lot of that stuff that you're seeing take place throughout America, and these changes of safety originate out of California. So kind of all starts there, and all the other states are watching. So if you're outside of California, it doesn't mean that you can just ignore this, because you're going to have to deal with it at some point in the future. It's best to start taking the steps and protecting yourself to make sure that you're doing everything you can to protect your employees from silica and make sure that you're not getting a fine, right? So we don't want the fines as business owners. You don't want to have to pay thousands of dollars to the government for fines. And at the same point, you should want your employees' health and their best interests at your priority for you, right? I mean, if you're creating a safe work environment for people to come to, you're going to be able to retain your employees, and you're going to be able to get better quality applicants that are going to come to work to you, right? So it is the right thing to do. I know, as most fabricators, most people don't maybe think that highly of OSHA, right? I mean, obviously it'd be impossible to do everything right. So I kind of feel the same way, but in this case, we should be focusing on trying to do everything we can. So I kind of want to go over some of the top, I got some ideas here that you guys can start looking at. It's kind of our top 10 list, if you will. There's a little bit more than 10, but these are, what should I do? I'm a fabricator. What should I do? And how should I be prepared to provide a safe working environment for my employees so they're not dying of silicosis? And what can I do to prevent any fines should an OSHA inspection come? And the first thing I want to say is, you just need to learn, right? I mean, you need to learn everything you can about silicosis and silica. You need to be talking with, shops that are in your area and out of state, right? I know a lot of times fabricators, get a little territorial and they don't want to talk to their competition. But the reality is this silica issue is something that's going to affect everybody. So you guys need to get all on the same page and figure out, okay, what steps are you taking? What is working for you? Okay, you got inspected by OSHA. What did they tell you you need to do so that I can make sure I've got that in place here? I mean, knowledge is what's going to get you through all this and make sure that you come out on the other side bigger, faster, and stronger. If you just kind of put your head in the sand and you're not worried about any of that, I can guarantee you ignorance is not going to play out very well when OSHA shows up. They really don't care if you didn't know about it. They're still going to be running their inspections. They're still going to be finding you, and you could even get your shop shut down, right? I mean, ignorance is no excuse for the law, and Cal-OSHA is not going to care if they stop by your shop. So I would be trying to learn everything you can. And I would also be bringing your employees into the fold, right? I mean, maybe your employees aren't even familiar with silica or don't even know what silicosis is. You, as the business owner, probably are aware of this because you see everything that's going on and people are talking about it. But you need to be bringing your employees into the fold and sharing them, hey, this is an issue. And these are the steps I think we want to take. And get them to start doing research too. Like, this is their livelihood and this is their career. You want to explain to them that, hey, maybe you don't like all these policies that we're putting into place, but let me tell you why we're doing that. So you've got to share more than just the how you're going to deal with it, but the why. And the why is, we don't want you to die. And we don't want to get fines that we can't afford that would force us to shut down our business. And we want to provide the best working environment we can for you. So even though you may not agree with all of these, it kind of is what it is. And this is the science behind it. And this is why we're doing that. So my main thing is make learning and make acquiring knowledge a key thing in your business, and then get your employees involved so that they know why you are taking the steps that you're taking. A lot of times when you just tell somebody to do something, they're like, why should I do that? I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never done that. Well, this is why you should do that. And this is why we're taking the steps. Explain the why and get them to get the buy-in. And that's only going to come with knowledge. If you don't thoroughly understand the subject matter at hand, there's no way you're going to be able to convince your employees that, hey, this is a good idea and this is why we're getting buy-in. So it starts with you, the business owner. Learn everything you can, and it goes downhill from there. So learn and share, and research everything you can. You've got ISFA, you've got the Natural Stone Institute, you've got the Marble Institute, you've got Stone Fabricators, all slab fabricators. There are so many groups out there in the space nowadays. You can go visit all of them and see what everybody's saying and put together the best thing that you can for your company. So second thing you need to do once you've got all that learned is you need to have a written safety and exposure plan, and it must be written out. So if OSHA comes to your shop, the first thing they're going to do is announce why they're there and tell you how come they showed up. I mean, generally it's just a surprise inspection. You might have had somebody that turned you in and said you had unsafe working environment, or if you had an injury at your shop that was reported, they would show up for that. So generally they'll announce why they're there every single time. So you'll figure that out. But one of the first things they're going to ask you is, can we see your written exposure and safety plan? And you might be thinking in your mind, yeah, we're doing everything safe. We do this, we take these steps, we clean this out, we're doing air quality testing. But the reality is, if you don't have it written down for them to be able to verify, it doesn't exist. So if OSHA comes to your shop and they're asking you for that, and you're like, oh, well, we don't have that. We just take our word for it. We're doing safety trainings. Take our word for it. We're doing air quality testing. If you don't have that, they're going to assume you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't care. You don't care about your employees' safety. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're just going to get a really bad picture painted of your company immediately, because if it's not written down in the eyes of the government, it doesn't exist, right? I mean, it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to bring the receipts to back it up. And you want to have those receipts for OSHA. That's one company you definitely want to have the receipts for, because if they find one thing that's wrong, they're going to keep looking and they're going to find a million things that are wrong at your shop, right? So that safety plan, if you don't know how to write a safety and exposure plan, you can go Google, search OSHA safety and exposure plan. You can get templates online. Another thing that you can do that we recommend later on down is get a third-party inspection company to come in, go through your company, and ask them to help you write a comprehensive safety and exposure plan, right? And that will include, are you doing weekly safety trainings? How are you dealing with silica? Everybody must wear a mask. Everybody must cut with water and polish with water. What are the steps that you're taking? If they're not written down, they don't exist. If they're not written down, they assume they've not been shared with everybody in the company. That will get you in trouble right out of the gate. So you want to make sure you've got that just getting started so that OSHA goes smooth and you don't have any issues. Third thing is, if you're in California, you need to post a sign. You can get the sign. We've got it on our links in our blog. Basically, you just need to get that printed. I'm sure there's places by now that are printing them that you can just order online. If they don't, just send that graphic into your local sign shop, and you want to get that posted so that everybody sees it. Basically, it's saying that if you're working in this area, you are being exposed to silica, which has been known to cause disease. And if that's not posted and OSHA shows up, it's like an automatic $2,000 fine just for not having the sign. So yeah, it's going to be a pain. Probably going to pay 20, 30, 40 bucks to get the sign printed and get it mounted, but it's a lot cheaper than the OSHA fine. And this might be a conversation starter for many of your employees. They may not even know what silica is or know what it causes, right? So get that posted. It kind of opens the dialogue with your employees, and it might segue right into, hey, this is why we're taking the steps we're taking to keep you guys protected. So get the sign posted. That would be step number 3 that I would take as a best practice. And number 4, and I think everybody should know number 4 in the industry. I will say though, I have visited thousands of shops over the last 20 years. And even though everybody knows that you are supposed to be cutting, polishing, and doing everything with natural stone and quartz with water, there are still thousands of shops across the United States that are cutting, polishing, and grinding dry. And you can see these shops off in the distance. Like here in Texas, where I live, there's some shops down in Dallas, and you're getting close because you can literally see the cloud of dust just billowing up into the sky as you get closer to that area. There is not a drop of water at any of those shops whatsoever. Everything is being cut dry. And that is literally what makes silica so dangerous. If you're cutting it dry, all that silica is being thrown up into the air, and then you're breathing it in. And that's what causes the silicosis over time, is just breathing in that dust all day long. So everybody knows that you should cut with water. I think that's one of those things in this industry that is a definite known. But even though everybody knows it, I would say there's probably still 30 to 40% of the shops out there that are not applying it and are not taking the steps they need to do that. Now, I get it. Using water costs a lot more money than it does to cut dry, right? I mean, you've got to pay for the water that you're using. If you want to cut down on your water bill, you got to have a water reclamation system and purification system so that you can recycle that water. It's a lot more expensive to buy air polishers that don't shock you when you get wet, right? I mean, I went to a shop in Arizona a couple weeks ago. They didn't have, the electric polishers that are grounded with the GFCIs. They didn't have the air polishers. They obviously couldn't afford that. And their solution was just to take a soda bottle, a 2-liter soda bottle. They poked a hole in the bottom of it, and the water kind of peed out onto the countertop while they held the grinder upside down so they didn't get it in the motor and get shocked. And part of me is like, oh my gosh, just spend the money on a good grinder. But obviously, they probably couldn't afford that, or they didn't think they could afford that. And I mean, I got to give them props because at least they were cutting with water. Of that day in Arizona, we probably went to 20 different shops, and I would say only half of them had any water going. So I get it. It's expensive to do water, but it is the right thing to do. If you're not doing water, it really shows that you just don't care. Or, I mean, I guess you could say you don't have the knowledge, but I think everybody in the stone industry knows you need to cut with water. So that's really not an excuse anymore. If you're not using water, you're really doing your employees a disservice, and you're literally putting their lives at risk. There is not a single shop in the United States that should be cutting dry if you're working with stone or quartz. It's a no-brainer. That's something you need to implement ASAP. And if you think it's going to be expensive, you need to start planning and figure out how you're going to implement that. Might need to raise your prices, might need to take some other steps to figure out how you're going to do that. So definitely, absolutely be cutting with water. Use a water collection filtration system, right? If you're not using any water, obviously you don't have a filtration system or a collection system. And the key with that is you need to be able to have a place that you're going to be all of the extra grit and the soot and everything that comes from the grinding, all the minerals that are falling to the ground and all that. You need a place to be able to contain all of that. And a water filtration system is going to be pulling all of that out of the water so that you can dispose of it. If you're just using water and you're got fresh water and you're just polishing and cutting all day long, and all that sludge from the polishing is falling down onto the floor, and you don't have a collection system to squeegee all that too, you're just trampling it up all day long and you're just putting that into the air. So you need to, this kind of leads into the next thing. Keep everything wet and clean. That would be number 6. Keep the area completely wet. There should never be a time where the water evaporates and all of that sludge and dust is just sitting there and you're walking through it and you're trampling it up into the ground. The key is when you're polishing or cutting, all that sludge falls to the ground in the water so it doesn't get airborne. And then regularly throughout the day, you are squeegeeing that all down to your pit where the water reclamation system is taking that all out and separating the sludge and what would become dust out of the water so that you can dispose of it properly and it's not getting all up into the air. So really need to be thinking about that. I know we go to shops all the time and they've got great usage of water, but then the next thing you know, you're walking through a half inch of sludge, and every night that is drying out. When they come in the next morning, that sludge is still there on the floor because they're just kind of pushing it out of the shop. It's not getting cleaned regularly. And then when they trample back in, all that dust is coming right back up into the air. So effectively, it's not really doing anything. So always use water. Work on getting a water reclamation system in place and keep everything clean. If you see any sludge or debris from the polishing, get that cleaned away from your area so you're not continuing to walk in that, risking throwing any dust up into the air. So I think we're pretty much halfway through here. So I do want to take a minute just to talk to our sponsors. Without them, the show wouldn't be possible. But for those of you guys that are not familiar with Big Dog Adhesives, they are a sponsor of ours. They make the cartridge adhesives. This is their Seam Lock Pro. It is a no drip countertop adhesive. You can use it on solid surface. You could use it on natural stone or quartz. It is super strong. It's no drip, so where you apply it is where it's going to stay. So if you're doing like a shower seam or you're pulling a seam in a customer's home, where you put the adhesive is where it's going to stay. You're not going to have to worry about it sliding out of that seam and falling into the customer's expensive cabinets, or worried about it sliding down to the bottom of the seam and getting a dry seam at the top. So if you have not tried the Seam Lock, highly recommend you do. One thing that's really cool about the Seam Lock is it has a cinnamon scent to it. So if you're doing an install in a customer's home, that home doesn't get that stinky adhesive smell. Once it starts heating up, you kind of smells more like cinnamon cookies. So Big Dog Adhesive Seam Lock Pro, that is their cartridge adhesive. We've got more information on this on the website as well. And then if you are more used to working with knife grade adhesives, Big Dog Adhesives has come up with their Seam King. And Seam King is a knife grade adhesive. Instead of coming in a can that gets all crusty, they put it into this convenient pouch system. Basically, you squeeze out the adhesive that you need. They've got an app. You go to Seam King and download the app. Basically, you put in, hey, we've got a 25-inch seam. It'll tell you exactly how much resin to put out. If you're working with a quartz material, you can look up that specific color. So if you're working with a Cambria Britannica, you could say, okay, this is a Cambria Britannica seam. What color do I need? And it'll tell you, hey, you need to put out roughly a 4-inch strip of Seam King resin, and then you need to find the marble pigment. You're going to put in 1 pump of marble pigment, mix that up, and then you're ready to pull your seam with the hardener. One of the big advantages of this is you cannot burn the adhesive. So if you were to over catalyze it, it's not going to turn it yellow and kick it off. Your color stays a lot more true. And this is super, super strong and tough adhesive. It comes in a translucent white and a crystal clear resin. So no yellowing, really advanced pigment dispensing system. When you're doing an install, the seams are a lot of times the most difficult part to do. So if you've got a guy that's like me, that's kind of colorblind, or you've got a guy that struggles with matching seams, I'd really give this a shot because it'll really simplify their process and let them deliver a much better finished product. So that's kind of Big Dog Adhesives. You can go to bigdogadhesives.com. The Seam Lock is seamlock.com, and they are going to be stocking the Seam Lock in many major cities over the next year. I know Dallas, Texas just got stocked up. California and Washington are next, with several others right behind that. So highly encourage you to give Big Dog Adhesives a call and try their adhesive. I know a lot of people don't even care about adhesive, but remember, you're only as good as your weakest link. And a lot of people don't even think about adhesives. You need to start thinking about all the details if you want to be the cream of the cream and the best of the best. So that's kind of my spiel on Big Dog Adhesives. We're thankful to have them as a sponsor. So let's kind of get back here to the silicosis on number 7. What's the best practice number 7? And that is going to be never sweep or blow dust out of your shop. So this kind of goes along with keeping everything wet, and while it's wet, squeegeeing it all to your sump so that you can get it cleaned off. If you do have dust and it's kind of accumulated in your shop, do not take compressed air and blow that dust. That is going to blow silica into the air everywhere. You absolutely do not want to blow dust at all with compressed air in your shop. I know, even when I was working in the shop, it was normal at the end of the day just to blow yourself off and get all that dust out of your clothes. That's something you should try and avoid. And certainly if OSHA's at your shop, you do not want them to see an employee doing that because it'll be an automatic fine. So I would just, discuss that with your employees and say, hey, if your guys do that, let them know, hey, silica is a big deal. It might be on your clothes. If that sludge gets on your clothes and the water evaporates and dries off and just that dry dust is there, the minute they blow that with the air nozzle, all that silica is in the air and they're going to be breathing it in. So make sure that they are not sweeping dry dust and you are not blowing it with a compressed air. All of that sludge and all of that dust should be trapped in the water, and you just squeegee it down to your pit so that the water reclamation system can take all of that from the system. So next thing is air quality monitoring. So this is something that I would bet 95% of shops have never even thought about air quality monitoring. And I think a lot of shops don't even know what that is or how it works. So with the air quality monitoring, basically you need to be able to show OSHA that, hey, we have clean air here. Our silica load in the air meets the required limits. We are in good standing. And by being able to show that, it will also indicate, what other things you have to do, right? If you can show your air is clean, you might be able to get away with just like a little N95 mask. If your air is bad and it's got silica all over it, OSHA might say, well, your air is horrible. This doesn't work. You need to get this 3M full face mask. And that could cost $2,000, right? So basically what they do is you wear a little cartridge all day long on your lapel here. It takes in the sampling of the air. If there's any silica in it, it'll land into the little pump and it'll take it in. And basically what they're measuring for is in a cubic meter of air, you can basically have a grain of salt is basically what it comes down to in silica. So the test is very strict. So if you think your air is clean and you're not doing all these water and taking all these steps, I can guarantee you probably won't pass the test. So you want to start doing air quality monitoring right now, right today, and you want to do that air quality testing every 6 months. And the reason for that is if OSHA were to show up, you could say, hey, in our safety and exposure manual, here's the receipts. We do our air quality test every 6 months. These were the results. We are within spec. Or you could say, hey, this result came back out of spec. These are the steps we took to get us back in spec. Our next test is in 3 months on this date. If you've got the receipts to show OSHA, it's going to put you in a much better position. You do not want OSHA to be doing an inspection and you have never done an air quality test and they mandate that you do one and you fail it. And because you have no clue what that entails, that's going to be a very bad situation. And it's the right thing to do to keep your employees healthy and provide a safe working environment. So when it comes to air quality monitoring, on our website here, we've got some options. One of the people we recommend for air quality monitoring is the SGS Galson. They do a lot of air quality tests for like mining and the concrete industry and things of that nature. They're pretty much across the United States. So you can look up air quality monitoring in Google, or you can also look up SGS Galson and just tell them, hey, I'm a countertop shop. We want to get our air quality tested. Can you send me out the air pump cartridges so that we can wear them and make sure that everything is good to go? So again, OSHA wants to see that every 6 months that you're doing that air quality test. And then if you don't pass it, you can make the course corrections you need. Now, there are ways that you can do air quality testing on your own. There are some companies that offer those tests. Now, those tests will give you an indication of if you're going the right direction. But if that company that did the air quality test is not approved by OSHA, then it doesn't count. So the reason we recommend companies like SGS Galson, or if you do call one, ask them, hey, are you approved by OSHA? You want to make sure you're using a company to do your testing that is certified and approved by OSHA. Otherwise, they're going to be like, how do we know you just didn't write these numbers down yourself? Like there's got to be verifiable evidence that your air is good, and OSHA is going to want to see that you have been using an approved vendor. That way they can trust the results and know that, hey, you really are in spec or you are out of spec. So SGS Golson is a good one for that. So next thing is wearing a mask, right? If you've been doing your testing and you can see that you're within spec and it's what it's recommended, you might just be able to have your guys wear an N95 mask. And when I say wear a mask, I mean wear it as a mask is intended to be. And I know after the last 3 years, wearing a mask is the last thing that anybody wants to think about. We've been forced to wear masks. Well, I guess a lot of us, some of us didn't wear masks, but a lot of us were forced to wear masks for the last 3 years. And if you're one of those people that did wear a mask for 3 years, you probably don't want to put one on now. But you're going to need to explain to your employees that, hey, silica is a really deadly thing, and it can actually cause a disease called silicosis. We're not just wearing a mask to prevent us from catching the flu, right? So you can say, hey, for 3 years, you wore a mask to prevent yourself from catching what is essentially a flu. And I think it's safe to say that because the CDC just said that COVID is essentially a flu, right? So everybody wore a mask for 3 years to prevent themselves from catching the flu. You thought the flu was bad? Silica can actually cause silicosis, and you can actually die of silicosis, right? Like people weren't dying of COVID, they were dying with COVID. Big difference. If you breathe in the silica long enough, you're going to die of silicosis. It's literally going to kill you. So you need to wear a mask. So explain all of this to your employees, and I would make it very emphatic, right? Like we care about your safety. If you're not doing this, you can't work here, and we're not going to let you put your life at risk on our dime and have that be our responsibility, right? Like your employees need to wear that mask. Now, one thing that is kind of come back into play, this kind of all went out the window in 2020 through 2023, right? I mean, when COVID came, you could wear any mask, put on grandma's panties, and it's a mask. As long as you had something on your face, it was good. And you need to wear that mask 24 hours a day because it wasn't even safe to take the mask off to eat. Well, the reality is before COVID came along, if you were going to put in a mask on an employee, you need to make sure they were healthy enough to wear that mask, right? Depending on your employee's health levels, if they're breathing in that stale air that gets super humid after a while, you can expose yourself to bacteria. And depending on the health of that employee, wearing that mask can actually be making them more unhealthy than if they weren't wearing the mask. So you need to be testing your employees to make sure that they are healthy enough to wear a mask. They need to wear the mask for integrals of time when then they need to be able to take a break, right? You can't just be breathing in that stale, humid air over and over and over again. You need to remove the mask so that you can be breathing in fresh air, right? So those are all things that I know nobody's really thought about for the last 3 years. That all kind of went out the window, but these are all things now that you need to take into consideration, because if you force an employee to wear a mask and he's not healthy enough to do that and he ends up getting sick, you're going to be liable for that. So we really need to make sure that we are being responsible and doing what we need to do to protect our employees from silica, but also we need to make sure that the employees are healthy enough and in a condition that we can, what we are suggesting them to do, they can actually do and not be making them sick or creating a bigger problem than what we're trying to cure. So if your air quality is good, you can probably get away with an N95 mask. If OSHA comes in and they say, hey, your air quality is horrible, they're going to tell you that you need to get a PAPR mask. And those are a tight-fitting, powered, air purifying respirator. Basically, it's a full face mask, something like you would see out of Star Trek, full shield all the way across. It's got the little forced air in the back that comes up with a tube that force the air into the mask. And those things are super expensive. Like the ones from 3M are roughly $2,000. So a lot of people in this industry have probably never seen these masks. If you guys ever watch TV and you're watching like CSI or people that work in the labs, a lot of them are wearing these masks where they're exposed to things all the time. Like it's basically creates its own ecosystem for your face so that you're not breathing anything in. So similar to what you would wear on the fire department with your oxygen tanks on the back, except there's no oxygen tank. It's just a forced air pump that feeds to the mask. Not quite as extensive as the fire department mask, but it's basically the same concept. And I can tell you, having worn those masks, they're very annoying. They fog up. They get uncomfortable after a while. You don't want to be wearing those full face masks, right? It was a pain in the butt. The fire department, got real old, real fast. So you want to make sure you're doing your air quality tests so that you don't have to wear the full face mask. Hopefully, your guys can just wear the N95s and not have to worry about it. So wearing your mask, obviously a good step. Next thing is checking your employees' health. So to know if you have silicosis, there's basically two tests that need to be run. The first is a pulmonary function test that basically tests how you're breathing. And hey, when you breathe in, are your lungs able to take in that oxygen and transfer it to your lungs? If you breathe in, are you only able to fill your lungs to 50% or 30% or 100%? Where are you at on that function test? So the first one's a pulmonary function test. The second test they need to get is a B-read X-ray. It can't be a standard X-ray. It's got to be a very specific B-read X-ray, and it basically X-rays your lungs and sees if there's any damage from the silica. So you need both of those tests to be able to determine if your employees have silicosis. So you're going to want to ask your employees, hey, we understand silica is an issue. We really want you to take these two tests. Can you get out? And we're gonna pay for them. We'll have you go down and take the test. We want to make sure that you're healthy. So if the tests come back and you have an employee that he is at a risk for silicosis or he already has silicosis, then you got to have that difficult conversation and be like, hey, you have silicosis or you're at risk for silicosis. Working in the shop or doing installs is probably not going to happen any longer at our shop, right? You might be able to move him in a position as a templater, or maybe he's quality control in the field, or maybe he's helps doing estimating, or starts working with CAD CAM technologies for layouts. Anything that would get him away from the silica, because silicosis is not reversible. Once you have it, you have it. There's no cure for it, and it does not reverse course. So if if you think about your lungs have 100% capacity and you've removed 50% of their capacity and their ability to breathe, you're stuck at that 50% for the rest of your life. It's never going to get any better. So if you keep an employee that has silicosis or is close to getting it, you're just going to put his life in danger. So he needs to move to another position in the company, or he probably might need to find another career altogether where he's not around silica. So not only do you need to be testing your current employees so that you can say, hey, this is where I'm at. If OSHA comes in, you can say, hey, we've tested all of our employees. None of them have silicosis. These were all of their results. We've been monitoring our air quality. We wear masks. We're doing everything we can. We know where we stand. Now, as silicosis kind of becomes more popular and attorneys get involved, and there's a lot of groups that are going around to shops and saying, hey, these are the steps you need to be taking. Did you know you're putting your employees at risk? A lot of these employees have no idea that they're even at risk. They just think it's normal dust. As these employees find out that, oh my gosh, I've been exposed to silica all these years, I'm in an unsafe working environment, I should probably find a shop that is using water, that is taking all these steps. That's good, because you as a reputable shop now are going to have people coming to you looking for work. The bad thing is you need to test all of those people, get them the pulmonary function test and get them the B-read X-ray so that you're not inheriting a problem, right? Like, hey, this employee came to work for me. You might have had a great work environment for all of your employees for 10 years. You have a guy show up that's been at, shop X over here that doesn't do anything right for 10 years. That 10 years at that shop has caused him to develop silicosis. He comes to your shop. Now, all of a sudden, you get an inspection, your employees are tested. You've got an employee that has silicosis. That's going to fall on your workman's comp and your liability. And now you're responsible for that, right? So just like you would implement a drug test, or you would implement a, what's your background check, I would say, hey, part of our company policy is we want to know where you're at. We need you to take these two tests. If you're at a risk for silicosis, we don't want you to be in the fabrication or the install positions where you would be breathing in silica, right? Like, doesn't mean that you're not going to hire that person. It's just going to help you make sure that you're putting them into a position where you're not going to put their health or their life in danger. So be testing your own current existing employees, and then be sure you're testing those people that are coming to work for you. And I'll just make it part of your standard drug background and lung screening, right? To make sure that the people are healthy enough to be in the positions you're putting them in. So, like I said, If somebody does test positive with silicosis, that is a workman's comp issue. So one thing you're going to want to do is look at your insurance to make sure that you have the coverages you need. So if somebody gets silicosis, it is a workman's comp issue. Your general liability is not going to just cover any of the things that come up with that. Obviously, it's kind of new. There are a lot of attorneys and ambulance chasers that are jumping on this as the next hot topic. If somebody does get silicosis, I guarantee you they can probably find an attorney that will then take it with no money down and no retainer and say, hey, we're going to go after your employer. They didn't have a safe working environment. You might think your general liability would cover such a claim, but all of the silicosis are generally added as a rider, similar to mold or terrorism, or there's lots of things that general liability insurances do not cover that you have to then add back on as a rider. And if you have not added silicosis as a rider and you do get a lawsuit like that, you're going to be pretty much on your own. Your only option would be file bankruptcy and avoid that. But I don't know if that's really the right thing to do either. I mean, it is somebody's life that is at risk, and they're just trying to make sure that their family can provide health coverage for them, right? So it's not going to be cheap. Like I say, there's no drug that cures silicosis. The only thing they can do is try and maintain the quality of life while you live with silicosis. So review all your insurances, make sure your limits are all correct, and have a discussion with your broker agent to just make sure that you are covered and you guys have everything you need. Number 12 is going to be get a third-party safety inspection. So this is not an OSHA inspection. Across the United States, there are companies that specialize in safety compliance, and they will come in. You say, hey, I've got a countertop shop. We're aware of all the silica. Can you come in and do an inspection of our shop and make sure that we are doing everything right and that we can get in compliance? And these people will come and they'll do a review of your business just like OSHA does. They'll come in, they'll find everything that's wrong, and then they will provide you a written action plan of everything that you need to do to get into compliance. And the good thing about this is it's a third party. There's no fines associated with this. Yeah, you might find out you're doing a lot right, but you have somebody that's coming alongside you that's going to help you find ways to solve any of the issues that are discovered, right? These third-party compliance companies are not the enemy. They truly are your ally. They're going to come alongside you, point out what you're doing wrong, help you take the action steps you need to correct those problems so that you're in compliance. And then these companies will also help you get your safety and exposure plan written, dialed in, and get all the receipts that you need for OSHA should they show up. So this is a great proactive measure. This is probably, if I didn't do anything at a shop and I was the owner, this would probably be the one big step that I would take so that they could tell me everything I need to do and get it laid out. And then, you can decide what you want to do and what you can afford from there. But that's going to open your eyes on what you really are doing well and what you're not in compliance with, because I think it's pretty eye-opening when somebody else comes through your shop. If you're there every day, there's stuff that you just become accustomed to and you don't notice. But when a third party comes in and they start doing their inspections, they will find things that you never even thought of. And just because you didn't think of it doesn't mean that OSHA is not going to find it when they come in. So much better to have your ally help you get on the right track than have OSHA come in on an enforcement visit and find all those things for you and give you a fine. So inspection companies, there are numerous ones across the United States. I would just look up OSHA compliance safety company and just see what comes up, make some phone calls, talk to them, see what it entails. And then also I would try and call some references and just see, hey, what did they do? How did they work with you? What did they find? What did their compliance, what does it look like? What's the report look like? So that way, you know that you're using a reputable company, because the last thing you want to do is just choose a fly-by-night company that's not going to really get you into compliance. You really want to make sure that you're using a good, reputable safety company. The next thing you can do is you can request an OSHA inspection. And this is not a enforcement inspection. This is just more of a consultative inspection. And OSHA is going to come in just like they would on an enforcement inspection and go through your shop and find everything that is wrong. Now, before I called the OSHA consultative inspection, I would make sure the third party did an inspection with you so that when you call OSHA in, you make sure that everything you can think of is as dialed in as possible, right? I mean, you don't want to just have OSHA show up at your shop and be like, hey, come inspect us. And they walk in, they're like, oh my God, like this place is a disaster. Like, yes, they're there for a consultative inspection, but you can guarantee in the notes they're writing, okay, we need to watch all of this place. This place isn't making any efforts whatsoever, right? So when OSHA comes in as a consultative inspection, they're going to go through it just like they normally would. They're going to show you everything that you failed to comply with. And then the only thing that you have to agree to on the consultative is that anything they find, you will agree to make the corrective actions necessary to solve those issues within a certain amount of time, right? So if they come in and they're like, hey, you're missing a fire extinguisher, even though it has nothing to do with silica, they're going to inspect your building for everything, right? If you don't have the right fire extinguisher and it's not clearly marked and labeled and hanging at the right height, okay, that's an easy fix. Maybe you can have that fixed in a week. You're going to go buy a fire extinguisher and hang it on the wall. So OSHA is going to go down the list of all the violations. Hey, this violation here was a fire extinguisher. Okay, perfect. Our course of action to fix that is da 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 da. We'll have that fixed in a week. Then they come down. They're like, oh, you don't have any air quality monitoring. There's none at all. You have no receipts. Okay, I'm going to get SGS Galson in here based on their lead times. It's going to be 2 months. I'm going to get everything here. We'll have that done within 2 months. So you have to agree to fix everything they find and get it so that it is in compliance. But in exchange for that, for having OSHA come out and do a consultative visit, you have a 1 year grace period from an enforcement visit. So if you have OSHA come out, today is basically April 1st, or I think it's April 3rd. OSHA comes out today on, it's actually April 5th. OSHA comes out today on April 5th. They will not do an enforcement visit until April 5th of 2025. You have a 1 year grace period. So much better to do a consultative visit and find out what's wrong than have an enforcement visit show up unannounced. And then all of a sudden you're paying fines on everything and you still have to fix everything that is wrong. So the only reason that that 1 year grace period would be revoked is if somebody reported you for an unsafe working environment, or if you had an injury on the job site. Obviously, they could stop by and do an enforcement visit because they're going to want to find out what caused that injury. Now, the most common way to have an unsafe work environment reported is if you terminate an employee that's disgruntled, he might turn you in. But if you've already done a consultative visit and you've done the third party and then you've done the OSHA consultative visit, you're going to have everything dialed in. So even if they come out to do an enforcement visit because you get a ticked off employee, when they show up, you really don't have anything to work up. You're like, hey, you guys were here within the last year. We got our third party company that got this all dialed in. You came in, you saw we're good to go. There shouldn't be any issues. So like I say, third party inspection, then a consultative OSHA inspection, and then that gets you the 1 year grace period. So you don't have any surprise in enforcement visits. So one thing too, if you are a California fabricator, you do need to fill out a form that says your employees are exposed to a carcinogen. It's kind of a standard form that all California employees need to do. So you fill that out, you submit that to OSHA. And, as soon as you submit that, it's basically going to be a red flag and they're going to put that into their box and eventually they're going to come out and visit you. If you haven't submitted it, you might be able to fly under the radar for a little bit. But if they come to your shop and do a surprise inspection and they realize you haven't filled out all those forms, it's going to be a fine. So in California, you can pretty much rest assured OSHA is going to come do an enforcement visit at some time in the future. It's not a matter of if right now, it's a matter of when, right? They are really trying to get a chokehold on the Silicosis issue and get it squelched. So your chances of getting inspection are nearly 100%. The only thing that would delay it is OSHA is experiencing some staffing issues in California. I think they're like 30 to 40% understaffed. So the lead time might be out there, right? Which is good because now you've kind of got some time to take all these steps and start getting dialed in. But I would not delay. I would start taking the steps you need to make sure that you're providing a safe working environment from Silica with your employees ASAP and just get it done. Just don't quit making excuses. Get out there, take the steps you need to do. Because, the only other alternative is OSHA comes, you're not ready, you get fines. And the next thing you know, the business that you've worked so hard on is fined. And if you can't pay the fines, your business is going to close. And then all your employees lose their job. You lose everything you've worked for. And that's not what we want to see happen anywhere, right? And the other thing is, if OSHA comes to all these shops and none of them are taking any efforts to try and be in compliance, OSHA's just going to say, all right, we're done. We're going to take the same action that Australia did. There's no more quartz. And then you may not have a business right now. Now all of a sudden you just got natural stone to sell to everybody. If people can't afford it, or people don't want it, or people are going to other materials, I mean, you might have just cost your business its life right there. Right. And I would not put it above the government. If they can't get a handle on it, that is the enforcement they will take. And as we've all seen, the only thing the American government is really good at is screwing stuff up and failing to perform. That's like what they excel at. Like, I don't know if you've met many government employees, but that's what they're really good at. So you can guarantee that if they can't get a handle on it, they're just going to make a blanket policy, because that's the only way in their mind that they will be able to solve the problem. So we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that Quartz is out there for everybody. So please take this seriously. Even if you're not in California, start thinking about these things. Visit our blog site, visit the ISFA, visit Natural Stone Institute, Marble Institute, Stone Fabricator Alliance, all slab fabbers. Just try and get all the information you can so that you can make the best decisions for your business that are as possible, and that you can put your employees in the safest position to succeed. So that's pretty much what I got there. We'll have all the blog links down where you can get to all of this information down below. And like I say, if you guys have any comments or questions, do not hesitate to give us a call or shoot us an email. Love hearing from you. And we hope you guys all have a great week.
Thank you for joining the Countertops 101 podcast, your resource for innovative ideas and strategies to take your business to the next level. Remember, a rising tide lifts all ships.